Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Data Unchained. I'm your host, Molly Presley. If you haven't listened to Data Unchained before, let me tell you just a little bit about what this podcast is about. Over the last few years, few decades, the paradigm for data access has constantly been changing. We had the introduction of cloud computing, then we went through COVID and remote workers became much more prevalent. And through all of this, data has become more and more decentralized. And we're focusing this podcast on, in this decentralized world, how do you get data to the remote workers, the distributed applications, the different cloud regions and data centers that can make use of it? Data Unchained digs into both the challenges as well as the solutions in making data an asset as a global resource. Today's guest is Ariel Pohoryles. Hopefully I got the last name right. Ariel is the head of product marketing over at Rivery. Ariel, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about Rivery? I'm not sure if it's a household name to everyone who would listen to this podcast or not. So maybe just tell us a little bit about what problems are you solving in this data world?
Yeah, absolutely. So Rivery is a modern data platform. And you mentioned all those decentralized environments earlier in the introduction, which is often created as a result of a lot of different SaaS tools. Rivery is a SaaS platform that really helps you integrate all of your data as it comes from all those different SaaS tools out there, which are really sitting outside of your environment, outside of your network, outside of your control, but holds your data. So Rivery helps you bring that data from there's close to 30,000 SaaS applications out there in the world. The average organization is using on average about 400 SaaS tools as part of their day-to-day operations. So bringing data from those different SaaS tools into their data lakes, into their data warehouses in a managed way, that's what Rivery solves initially. And then once you bring the data into your lake and warehouses, it helps you transform the data, model it, make it ready for a consumption, whether it's from an analytical workload or even in a machine learning or AI use case, maybe even for LLM models creation. And then afterwards, it also helps you even push it out at will to different business applications. So really helping you move the data from wherever it is outside of your control into wherever you need it ultimately. That's what Rivery does. And an important piece that goes along with it is obviously not just being able to connect it from point A to point B, but also try to make it in an efficient way. So, of course, orchestrate that process in a way that they would take into account different dependencies, in a way that they would allow you to control the right timing of when the data ought to move, and also try to not to move it when possible. So the whole transformation layer, for example, that I mentioned earlier, that is something that Rivery tends to do as much as possible in place, in database, using SQL, for example, and then kind of avoid that data movement if not needed. So we try to connect kind of the data that you need outside of the network when you need it, and then when you have it in your control, try to move it as little as possible.
Interesting. So if you're talking to a business leader who is grappling with that tough decision of, do you want the newest SaaS tool because of the benefits you'll get of it, but this worry that now all of a sudden you have another data silo, you allow them to have the best of both worlds where you can use the tools you want and the data silos don't really matter because Rivery is integrating them. Is that a good way to think about it?
It is. And, I think, all those SaaS tools, they realize that they need to deliver the data to their customers in a certain way. So it starts with internal reporting that those tools offer. If you go to Salesforce, for example, which is maybe the most common or popular example for what a SaaS tool is, they have a great and very robust reporting system within Salesforce. But at some point, that reporting layer needs to be enhanced together with data from other sources. And this is where that integration problems come into play. And that's where you need to get access to that data. Salesforce and most other SaaS providers these days offer the data through an API. So what Rivery gives is not just a way to connect to it, but also a consistent way to manage it. Because these days, most data engineers are very comfortable writing a small Python script that would pull data from a certain API. But then the problems come into play when that data pipeline, that API changes over time, that data pipeline needs to be updated. So that's a lot of management, a lot of headaches. And that's something that Rivery solves seamlessly for those data engineers, so they can focus on their core business, on the data models, on adding value to their business, to their main offerings, versus kind of maintaining those integrations. And by the way, this is true not just for APIs of external SaaS applications, but also for operational databases, internal or external. Those databases also hold very important data that needs to be moved into a lake or warehouse for integrated analytics. And moving that data as well is a challenge. Again, not very hard initially to establish that first connection, but over time your database evolves, the schema of the database changes, and kind of managing that schema drift is something that Rivery does seamlessly for you. So it handles that initial migration, which is a challenge of its own because of large data volumes, but then afterwards also the ongoing replication of the data as data updates and as your schema changes in that data source.
Before we jump into kind of the meat of the conversation, I'd love to talk a little bit more about your background, Ariel. This is a space where folks are coming from all different parts of industry and education backgrounds. So in a data company as the head of product marketing, what is your background, both work as well as education?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Maybe a bit different than the typical product marketer you'll see in other organizations. So I kind of got my education in the data space. I learned information system engineering, and then afterwards, my first job was within a large corporation as a data engineer. And doing in-house ETLs and reporting processes that we had back in the days on kind of what would be considered today legacy tools. But I'm not sure even my
because
title.
They've been around for like a few years.
Yeah, it's been 20 years now, so it's been quite some time. But I'm not even sure it was titled as a data engineer back then. But that's essentially what I was doing in my position. Today, the title as data engineer back then maybe was I forget what it was, data system engineer or something like that. But essentially, worked within a large corporation as part of the internal team as a data practitioner. Afterwards, I moved to a vendor that focused on data visualization products, helping to build dashboards and analytical workloads similar to maybe Tableau or Power BI. A bit more focused on embedded BI, so integrating those reporting layers into other tools, but essentially more in the data visualization space. And that's where I kind of got into more of a pre-sales role. I led that team. Afterwards, it was somewhat of a natural move from that sales domain into the marketing world. That's why I got into product marketing. And following that, I ran a consultancy, a local subsidiary of a global data consultancy, helping customers, advising them on what should be their data infrastructure, data architecture, and then afterwards helping them implement those recommended solutions. So I've kind of been, I think, in kind of the internal position on the vendor side, developing the software, and then on the consulting side, implementing different tools. And what I like the most, I think, is really that innovation that the vendor is able to deliver through, of course, the feedback that you get from the market and from the consultant partners that you have, but really have the control, be the closest to kind of what comes out next and what new capabilities the software would provide to their users. So that's something I always liked, and so for me, kind of getting back into it with Rivery was a great opportunity. So yeah, maybe not the classic marketeer, but definitely connected to the market, to data trends, and to how it should be applied by our users. So that's maybe where I can add more value as a product marketer.
Makes sense. I have taken a similar career path out of engineering into more on the software side into marketing. So I definitely find that works well because you understand the technology and the problems firsthand, and then it's a little bit easier maybe to speak to them in your marketing role. What I would like to talk a little bit about, we were doing the prep calls for this conversation, we were talking about a tool that Rivery has put together about the 7 principles of the data pipeline. And as you were telling me about that, and we were chatting about it, it was very similar, I think, to a lot of the concepts that Hammerspace, the company I work for, has around, you want to unify data sources. You only want to move data when you have to, having transparency of data sets and all those things. There's different ways to approach this problem, but it's a singular or set of issues that data pipelines have that will make, whether you're in going after artificial intelligence or machine learning or traditional kind of a little bit more like business intelligence. I think these are big things for people to try to think through as they're architecting their data strategies, the ways to accomplish those items, the moving only when you have to, having visibility to data sources, having a clean kind of gold data set. So let's talk through those 7 principles that you guys have put together and just walk through why they're important in different ways, maybe that an architect of a data pipeline or somebody in senior leadership might be thinking about what to ask their organization, how they're handling these items. So the first one you go into, of course, you're a SaaS tool too. Is that correct at Rivery?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, so zero infrastructure management. How do you guys pull that off, and what do you recommend?
Yeah, I think I heard on your podcast, David Flynn, Hammerspace CEO, has been talking about data shouldn't be tied to infrastructure and shouldn't be shouldn't be an infrastructure problem, and I totally agree with that. It used to be when I was doing ETLs back in the day, it was all on-prem and all kind of tied to the VM that the server we used to work on. So at some point, data volumes grew and the ETL jobs started timing out. So kind of being able to really leverage a lot of what I think Snowflake started doing in the data warehousing space, where there's separate compute and storage. Same thing should apply as well to the data pipeline that moves data into the warehouse or into the data lake. It should really be completely seamless, and data engineers' role or even data analyst role should be focused on let's get the right data point we want, not on setting up the infrastructure behind it to get a pipeline moving. Because again, going back to the proliferation of data sources we have, when I was the data engineer, I had maybe a couple of databases, SQL Server and Oracle, and a couple of Excel files I had to integrate data from. These days, every other day, the marketing team comes with a new data source they need to ingest, and now you need a new data pipeline. So it's really impossible to kind of keep on managing the infrastructure on an ongoing basis and kind of make sure it scales to the demand of the business. So from that perspective, being able to leverage really what the cloud offers from that perspective is key to ensure that you have the ability to consistently deliver on the data streams that the business needs.
I think that as I've been looking at the evolution of this market, there's this goal to want to be able to use all data in these data initiatives now, where maybe historically it was a subset of your business data or your Salesforce data or whatever it was. And I think the trend that is leading to this, you can't be infrastructure bound because the tools are largely in the cloud and the applications, the compute power, and yet data is being generated everywhere. And the organizations who can pull all of their data, structured, semi-structured, structured, multiple locations into a data pipeline probably will be most successful. And so it's a huge shift, I think, in putting data to work versus just storing it, and having it isolated. And it can't be infrastructure bound in the end in order to accomplish these goals.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And I think this is really if you bring it down to a data engineer's world or an ETL developer world, this is what kind of created that shift from ETL to ELT. Let's extract and load the data first into the destination and then transform it. And that gives you the option to move much faster because you don't need to always plan in advance what you'll be modeling. And the moment that the business requirement change and there's another question to answer, oh, I missed that field in my original pool. Now I have to go back to my ETL process and change it. No, you extract and load everything. And then from there, you can transform and model the specific data sets that you need to answer those different business requirements. So
I think that's worth kind of emphasizing. So you're suggesting, maybe for those listeners who are not data experts, that kind of historically the workflow has been ETL, which is extract, transform, load. And you're suggesting that a shift in the mindset to doing this workflow a little bit differently now. Can you just emphasize that point a little bit so folks understand kind of the importance and how this is a different way of thinking for the data folks?
Yeah, absolutely. ETL used to be the way people used to integrate data just by extracting it from a certain source. Let's say the source was a Salesforce, as you mentioned earlier. So they extract it, they load it to the destination database. Let's say it's an Oracle database, and then, they transform it in memory in the ETL world, and then they load it into their target database. Let's say it was an Oracle database. And again, that approach worked well up to a certain data volume. But the moment data volume started to grow exponentially, transforming all that data in memory was impossible. And so data engineers found themselves kind of doing all kind of different manipulations to make sure that those processes don't time out. They had to pre-aggregate the data, and then business users only received the aggregated results, and they couldn't drill down to the raw data level and really fully answer all the questions when they want to get the fine-grained details. So what cloud data warehouses such as Snowflake, Google BigQuery, and others brought is the ability to separate the compute from the storage and essentially load a lot of data into very cheap storage, relatively cheap storage in S3 or Azure Blob Storage, Google Cloud Storage, and then from there process it with compute as needed. And so that created that facility to really shift to an extract, load, and transform mode, where you extract and load pretty much all your data as quickly as you can to the target destination, whether it's a data lake or the cloud data warehouse like Snowflake and BigQuery. These days now Databricks as well, and then do the transformation as mentioned in place, using the compute power of that engine. So that's really kind of that shift in the process, and it solves a lot of problems, not just the ability to process large volumes of data, but also, as I mentioned earlier, being able to really respond rapidly to changing business requirements, because you have all the data already available to you. When a new question comes up, it's fairly easy to now do a simple query and maybe model data, or even just query it when it's already available in the destination, versus kind of now having to go back to your original pipeline, modifying it, and bringing more data from the source. So that's what the ELT.
Thank you for expanding on that. Yeah. It's a subtlety in the acronym, but a big deal in the workflow. So I want to make sure we spend a little bit of time on that.
Yeah. It's very confusing because the term ETL kind of stayed, but people are doing now ELT for the most part. But it's just okay. Now there's a confusion in the world that we're calling it ETL, ELT. Most modern pipelines would be ELT based these days, but that term of ETLing still remains. Yeah.
So going on and talking about how you interact with the data, speaking SQL and Python, I know you highlight that as one of the 7 principles. Maybe you can expand a little bit on, I think most people know what SQL and Python are, but why you really highlight that as an important point.
Yeah, I think in your question, you actually touched upon the most important factor. Most people know what SQL and Python are. And I think that's what really allows almost anyone to get into running those pipelines and having control of the data. In the past, when I used to do ETLs as what was not called data engineer back then, then I used to use a lot of graphical tools, which offer a lot of capabilities with different kind of components. I used to drag and drop onto the screen and kind of create kind of ETL processes with kind of different chain of events, those kind of building blocks I used to drag on the interface. The problem with that is that required a lot of time in learning those tools. They were very capable, but you had to spend a whole week and certifications and courses just to pick up the tool. And then afterwards, it wasn't very easy for other users to understand what's in it, because they had to go into each one of those components and check the configuration of that component and understand how it's affecting your pipeline. And mostly, it wasn't very portable. So if I now need to move from one tool to a different one, I kind of had to start again, rebuild my entire pipeline. But if I'm using SQL, everybody knows SQL. So learning a tool that just talks SQL is actually very quick and easy. And then if I want to switch to another tool or a different environment where I want to run my SQL code, maybe I'm moving my SQL code from my ingestion tool to my orchestration layer, which is maybe something I need to do at times. Now I can do that very easily. And lastly, so it's the quickness, it's the ease of use, it's the fact that everybody knows it, and it's also the fact that you can collaborate a bit more around it. So because it's code, you can now use more advanced CI/CD capabilities and kind of collaboratively develop the code together and push changes, common things like Git and whatnot. So this makes it a bit more kind of common to the data engineers that elsewhere also develops in code and is kind of used to the CI/CD kind of methods. So for all those reasons, I think modern data pipelines ought to speak SQL. And maybe the last thing I'll mention around it was a long answer, I know, but just one more thing I'll mention around it is that the data warehouses and the analytical tools that we use on top of those warehouses, Tableau, Power BI, and whatnot, they all speak SQL between them. And so that's kind of the ruling language. The modern data infrastructure, at least from the analytical perspective, typically is centered around those warehouses. And so that's why it's so key for those data pipelines that moves data into those warehouses to speak SQL as well.
Makes sense. And we share a lot of similar thoughts in the development of the Hammerspace technology, that this idea of using enterprise standard tools, where it's the technology, the code languages, the interfaces that people are accustomed to are going to make these data initiatives move faster. If people have to learn something new or deploy something bespoke, it slows things down. Standards make it much easier to deploy. And, I think it's interesting that at the different layers of these workflows and these pipelines, how that comes into play. Your next point is about multiple storage layers. And, one of the things Hammerspace does is makes that possible through standards-based approaches versus a bunch of, I need a specialized high performance tier and a specialized low cost tier. And you're looking at from the overall data pipeline that's important as well. And maybe you can talk a little bit, we think about mostly about locality and performance, so where is your data? How much does it cost to store it? And how fast is it to use by applications and humans? I suspect you think about storage layers somewhat similarly, but you may have different attributes that are important to you, and as you think about your principles.
Yeah, definitely agree with the way you think about it. And I think what we see from our customers is just the fact that, as again, taking it to more of the analytical workloads, there is now that the concept of giving more, and it goes along with the decentralized concept we mentioned earlier, but giving more self-served access to different units in the business. And with that, oftentimes come the choice of tooling as well. Sometimes it's deliberate, sometimes it's a necessity based on the skill set of that department and team that wants to access and use the data. So we see customers, for example, where the selected a warehouse or lakehouse layer in this case for the organization is Databricks, for example, where they have a pretty strong data engineering team and they know how to optimize Databricks very well. And then on the flip side, they have an HR department with very sensitive data that they don't want to expose to data engineers. So they want to be self-sufficient around managing the data, but they're not technical enough to get into something like Databricks. So for them, the choice of Snowflake is a bit easier. So we find ourselves supporting the same organization with pipeline that sometimes end within Databricks, sometimes end within Snowflake, sometimes just end within an AWS S3 bucket, because that data will then be served to the creation of a vector database for LLM modeling. So that is something we start to see more and more of. It used to be that you try to bring data into one place and create the one source of truth. And now which we see a new paradigm where you want to have that source of truth, but in more of a connected way, not necessarily meaning that all the data is in the same exact database or warehouse to begin with. That's the way we see it.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So how does that play into, I think it's the fifth point around operational analytics and reverse ETL? How does that kind of play into that process?
Yeah, I'd say that's slightly a different. There's a small distinction there between considering that a storage layer. But what we see is that if in the past what we used to do is bring all the data into, again, that one database that then would serve all the other applications, whether it was the reporting layer, whether it was external business applications. The way businesses try to proliferate that data to the consumers was either through that tool. Let's say it's a Tableau dashboard. Okay, I'm speaking Tableau because it's a very popular and famous tool. So you got your salesperson operating most of his day in Salesforce, maybe HubSpot, maybe Outreach, maybe other tools that they live in. And then you ask them to go into Tableau to check out the reports and maybe some activities that they need to take for a day. And those reports could be very valuable to them when they try to decide how to approach a certain prospect, for example. But that's just creating another silo for them on the consumption layer. So the way this was solved by Salesforce, well, okay, they acquired Tableau, but essentially embedding those BI tools into the operational layer. But that's not always possible. That's not always an easy integration process. And so what we see more and more of these days is really the concept of pushing that data back into operational applications with the insights that you've enriched in your warehouse. So you brought data into the warehouse, you enriched it with other sources. Now you have a good supporting data point to help that business user make a better decision. That data now needs to be delivered to them where they operate. And it could be Salesforce, could be HubSpot, could be NetSuite, could be in Slack. But essentially, they need to get that data in the place where they used to work. And that's, again, something that we didn't used to see in the past. As a data engineer, you used to finish your work once you brought to the warehouse. And then from there, okay, business analyst, you can take it on and do whatever you want to do with it. But now, no, you need to go the extra mile and deliver it to that place, which, again, breaks those silos, create greater adoption to the data insights that you want to bring to the business, and ultimately creates more value to the users.
Yeah, absolutely. A more integrated and kind of continually changing process, isn't it?
Exactly.
As you look at the idea of transparency, and maybe you can talk about what you mean by that. Is it about data sources and the quality of the data sources, or is it organizational, like leadership understanding on what kind of data is? What are you talking about when you highlight the importance of full transparency?
Yeah, I think, I don't know how many people realize that, but obviously cloud is not a new thing, and SaaS tools have been around for more than 10 years now, if much more than that. But I think the data industry took some time to jump onto the cloud, and it didn't move to the cloud initially. A lot of it, I think, was because of some concerns around what would happen once I manage not just have some SaaS applications where I have some data hosted, but also my own applications data living in the cloud, and what would that mean from a control perspective. Over time, I think data gravity concept and obviously the advantages cloud bring around elastic compute and all the things we talked about earlier kind of force the data industry to finally make that shift and bring data workloads to the cloud as well. But essentially, there's still that concern around what happens when I use a SaaS tool to process my data. Where is my data going through? Is it efficient? Did all my data go through? Can I control how it's flowing to my target warehouse? And so how do I trust and make sure that all my pipelines are running? Because data engineer doesn't want to be woken up at 2 a.m. getting a phone call from someone that reports to the CEO telling him, hey, the dashboard is not updated because data is not moving. So kind of just being able to control all of that and see it end to end. And I think that's a problem that we've seen with some other modern tools that are handling only one piece of your data integration process, which actually is pretty popular. You can see an extract and load tool, which brings data from different SaaS applications into a target, and then maybe a different tool that does transformation, and then a third tool that does orchestration. And then you end up having a pretty complex set of tools to manage together. And I think a lot of new tools came up as a result to try and help you get kind of some observability of that entire flow from end to end. So just being able to see kind of that process, how your data is flowing through and making sure your pipelines are running consistently, I think that's a key factor. And so it's an important layer that is often kind of overlooked initially. It's like, okay, I found an integration tool. It brings data from point A to point B. Great, that's all I need. But no, it actually, the moment you start scaling, you need to be able to see end to end where data is being processed, how much data is moving, some metadata about it as well, which fields are changing, what happened over time to that, and when there are errors, because at some point there will be, just getting a good understanding of where those issues are happening and how to solve them. So without that, it will be very hard to scale your pipelines.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's interesting. And something I didn't fully understand till just now. So with Rivery, you have the ability to have the different data sources and the different data tools, but you'll have that entire visibility of the flow of the entire pipeline, no matter where it's coming from.
Exactly.
In your unified tool. That's pretty cool. That's interesting. I like that. I can definitely see the value.
Especially once you start applying transformations and you have some dependencies between your pipeline. You know, when you do data modeling, oftentimes you want to build your dimension table first and afterwards your fact table. All of those dependencies need to kind of be orchestrated and sync together. And so kind of being able to see where in that chain of processes something failed is critical. Or if you're doing a ongoing database replications using methods like CDC, if you change data capture, replication fail at some point, being able to decide exactly when you want to pick up that process again and kind of keep on bringing data from that point in time where it failed is critical to make sure that your data is consistent and in high quality. And that's something that really goes hand in hand with being able to run those pipelines at scale.
Cool. So I think when I talk to business leaders, I usually think about most initiatives are funded either because they make money or they save money. It was one or the other. And when you think about faster time to value and how all of this that we've been talking to is helping an organization with value, is it around saving operational costs? Is it about increasing revenue streams? Is it both? What kind of value do you see that Rivery is accelerating?
I definitely think it's both. So I think the first one, which is maybe an easier one to grasp, is around definitely the cost saving of running your data processes. I mean, I think it goes without saying, we're on this podcast, everybody knows that if you're not data driven, you're going to lag behind your competitors. And so that's everybody's goal these days, been for a long time already. So there's a good understanding of data is critical, data is needed. So then there's a question of, okay, how much does it cost for you to operate your data processes? And so using a tool like Rivery, you can really save a lot of effort around building those pipelines and managing them, which ultimately means savings in full-time employees that you would have kind of managing that infrastructure. So you really get immediate reductions around the headcount you would need. And if in the past you needed a team of 6 to 8 data engineers maintaining complex tools and working hard to make sure your pipelines and infrastructure are up and running, now you can do it with a team of 3 engineers, for example. So big savings around the team size and their ability to deliver those data processes. And also, as you mentioned earlier, the unification of those different tools ultimately saves as well in the licenses cost of multiple tools. When you have separate tools in your stack, you'd have to pay each one of those tools for the margins they need to make on the part of the process they operate. If you go with a bit more of a unified platform, then you can make some savings around the fact that the platform typically have a bit more of an economy of scale. and is typically emphasized where it's making its margins on a certain part of the process, but not all that part of the process. So that's on the cost saving side. But then I think the acceleration that delivers to what you mentioned earlier, the time to value to deliver those insights, this is where you can really create new revenue channels. If you are able to bring fresh data to the right place for the right user. So I'll pick up on the example I mentioned earlier. If you are able to enrich a salesperson or even just a sales development rep that is now in your website having a chat, a conversation with one of your prospects that came to your website, if you're able to enrich that individual with fresh insight about the prospect that's talking to him right now and help him really giving more valuable answers as they converse, that really can progress your ability, or that really can increase your conversion rates on that lead, which ultimately will turn into more business. So definitely it's a combination of both. And I think that kind of concept of reverse TL is really becoming more and more critical because of that realization that this is creating more revenue for the business, not just savings and efficiency in the operations.
Yeah, I think it's certainly for me highlighted with whenever I use ChatGPT that often I'll ask it a question or be doing whatever I'm doing with it, and it'll say, "Just a reminder, my data is from 2021, and my latest data load." And I think that's something probably a lot of us who aren't data engineers can relate to. That the value of current, up to date, real time or close to real time data is super valuable and also very hard, right? And I think that you're really highlighting that, and that will be a competitive advantage as well to the data-driven businesses who are not just using data, but the latest and most current data as well. Yeah,
100%. How do you activate your data? How do you make sure that data is really available to you at the right place and junction where you need to make the decision? That's the key part, and it starts with making sure, okay, you have the data available to you, and it ends with pushing it to the right place with the right enrichment.
So as we tie up, I feel like we should at least mention, beyond my reference to ChatGPT, Gen AI, and how that plays into the world. So you've been at this a long time before this latest wave and craze around generative AI. Do you see that as changing the industry, just continuing to accelerate it? Kind of what do you see that role will be in these data pipelines and how Gen AI is affecting it?
Yeah, 100%. I think there's a lot of applications where Gen AI would be instrumental for the data engineering industry, specifically focusing on data engineering. Like many other industries, we see a lot of copilots tools showing up in different environments. I think for data engineering as well, getting like a nice copilot that would help you write your SQL faster, write your Python faster, better understand the APIs you're dealing with to extract the right data points you want to extract or push into different APIs you're writing to. So and definitely that's going to be, I think, something we'll see more and more of. It's still, at kind of those early days where people are still questioning how valid is the output or how sophisticated it can get. But I think we have clear sight to see that it will get to the level of sophistication that's required. And there's enough tools in place to make sure it will help you accelerate without making silly mistakes. So that's I think in motion, and again, some early solutions out there are already helping. The other thing I think that data engineers did need to deal with in the past, and we'll see more and more of these days, is the need to not just leverage Gen AI for their work, but also be able to build models, LLM models that would help their organizations. Because it's not just about taking ChatGPT, but it's actually taking ChatGPT's capabilities and applying those to your domain, to your organization's kind of knowledge, and creating kind of that mini LLM that's true for your organization. And so they'll need to now manage the pipelines that feed maybe vector databases to build those LLMs. And so that's going to be, I think, a new ongoing kind of activity that data engineers will have to manage. And the tools will come with it, tools that will help you better load data into vector databases, and tools like Rivery that will help you get the data to begin with into your lake or before it's loaded into the vector database. So all of that will come together.
Do you believe your 7 principles will be modified as the whole Gen AI craze continues to evolve and everything we've just been talking about? Or do you think they pretty much stay the same, that the principles are the same, it's just the application?
Yeah, I want to believe that they will. I feel like modern is always changing, right? So I'm sure some of those things will, out of 7 principles, probably not, most of them will stay the same, but I want to believe that maybe we'll add one more or modify one because of the new capabilities, and not just the one the way you apply it, but just because of kind of the breadth of options Gen AI opens. So I'm sure that I'm hopeful that we'll create a new principle. I'm not sure yet exactly what that principle is going to look like. So that's a great question. Maybe next time we talk, I'll come back to you with a more grounded answer based on what we see in real life. But I think for now it's a bit too early. But we'll probably see it in the coming months, years for sure.
Awesome. Ariel, thank you so much for taking time to join this conversation and share about Rivery. I'm very interested, as I've told you before, both in potentially alliance work with Hammerspace as well as the things we're mutually doing to try to help our customers. So I look forward to continuing the conversation. For our listeners, if you're interested in reading this white paper, we will be attaching it to the show notes. So if you want access to it, just look at the Data Unchained page on Hammerspace, and you can get a link to the white paper we've been discussing to read through all of this in more detail, share it about your organization. Ariel, thank you so much again. It's been great having you on the show.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Data Unchained, powered by Hammerspace. To learn more, visit hammerspace.com. If you have a guest you would like to hear on the show, email me at molly@hammerspace.com.